In this video, we're going to start to look at our second section. Our first section, these 1-1, 1-3, was dealing with HTML elements, and now we're going to start to move into some CSS elements. So we looked at HTML. CSS is our next language we're going to use. It's kind of our second one in our big three: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And CSS is going to control how our web page looks. We can add coloring and margin and just a bunch of features that kind of enhance our headers and paragraphs and the things we see on the web page. So let's go to our Explorer over here. Let's open it up. I'm going to close down the 1-1, etc. folders. Let's make a new one. Call this 2-1-CSS. Click enter. Let's start with a file here. I'm going to call this External CSS. Let's just call it sample CSS for now. And this isn't actually going to be an HTML file. We'll do a CSS file in a second. So I'm going to do .html. This is where I want my HTML code. Click enter. All right, now we have our HTML file. Let's fill it out with our standard HTML tags. First the HTML, then the head, and then the body. Okay, so that's kind of our standard starting point for a web page. Let's add a few basic things in the body. We'll add a header, sample header. Let's add a paragraph, maybe one more header too. Just do a second one here, H3, second header, and second paragraph. Okay, I'm going to save it. That should be enough to get us started. Just a quick reveal in File Explorer. Let's open it up, make sure it looks okay. Okay, so there is our web page. And now let's start to talk about CSS. So everything we've done so far is in HTML components. Tagged, it's text, it's things we see on the page. CSS is going to be more descriptive of the things we have done already. So it's going to enhance them. There's different ways to use CSS. The first way we're going to look at is using external CSS. So we're not going to write the CSS in this file. We're going to write it in a separate file. So to do that, I'm going to go over here to my folder. I'm going to right click on this, click new file, and then I am going to just make a sample CSS and then .css file. So I'm just giving them the same name so I know that they're related, and the .css here is going to make this a CSS file. I'll click enter, and there we go. So now we have this sample CSS file here, and let's start to write some CSS code. So to do this, what we can do is you'll first start by describing the things you want to change. So let's say we wanted to change our paragraphs. CSS gives us that power. All we're going to do is write the tag name we want to change. So I want to change a paragraph tag, so I'll write P here. Space, and then we do these curly brackets and click return or enter to push it down here. And that's the setup. Right now the CSS translates this as you're working on the paragraph tag, and inside these squiggly brackets is what you want to change about the paragraph. Let's do one example. Say one thing we might want to change is the color. And so in here we're just choosing different properties that we want to have changed or made different. So color is one option. It's going to change the color of that thing. So here it's going to be the text color. If I click return, colon here, so the kind of syntax if I was typing it out is color colon, but if you just click tab, it's going to do that automatically. And then you're going to need to choose a color. You can start typing different colors. Visual Studio is quite helpful in offering you different options. You can choose one, you can type it in. Another kind of handy thing is you'll see this box here. You can actually click on that box and kind of play around with it. Say we wanted a blue color, I could go down here to blue and pick around and release. And we get what's called an RGB value. If you're not familiar with that, that is red, green, and blue. Maybe a little bit complicated for this video, but basically these are three values. How much red do you want? How much green do you want? And how much blue do you want? So you can see with this blue here, the value is quite high. These numbers go up to 256, so 216 is quite high, which makes sense for a blue value. I don't really want to delve too much into that right now, so you can play around with that if you're curious, or you can just choose a simple color like red. Okay, let's go ahead and save this. If you were to go to your web page and refresh, nothing's changed. Although we've made a CSS file, it doesn't communicate with this HTML file. There's no intrinsic communication between them. We have to actually tell them about each other. So I need to have a reference to my sample CSS in this file somewhere. And that's where the head's going to come in. We haven't talked about the head that much, but this is a good example of where we would use it. Let's go ahead and expand the head. And if you remember from way back when we first introduced this, the head is about metadata. It essentially is things that describe what happened in the body. And CSS is a good example of that. These are things that affect our body. So they affect our paragraph and head and things like that. So let's go ahead and make that happen. We're going to use a tag called link. A link is essentially just forming a link between this page and another page. You can see there are different options. Let's choose the one that makes sense for us, the CSS. I'll click return, and a bunch of things pop up. So we see the relation here, REL. Again, that stands for relation. It's just saying, how are these related? Like, what is the thing you're linking to? By default, it's going to select style sheet. That's another way kind of explaining CSS. It's called a style sheet. So we're saying the thing I'm linking to is a CSS file. So computer, make sure you understand CSS properly. So this tells us what type. Again, that's denoted here with the .css extension. And then the href, if you remember from when we did links, we've seen an href before. The href is like where you want it to go to. And in this case, this is what do we want it to link to. Let's delete what's in the quotations. Since we're in the 2-1-CSS folder, we can just have access to the sample CSS. If you start typing it, it knows about all the files in the folder. And we want to link it to the sample CSS.css. Easy mistake would be to do HTML. You don't want to link to yourself. Link to the CSS. And again, don't forget about this little dot up here. We got to save it. If you forget to save it, nothing's going to happen. And now let's check it out. Okay. After refreshing, now we can see that we have the paragraphs are now in red. Cool. So it's making a change. What are some other things we could do? Well, let's try it. One thing I'll show you about Visual Studio, since we made these two folders, I'm going to close this out now. You can flick back between these two pages, or if you want them side by side, we can click and drag this. You got to go kind of far, all the way to the right here. You'll see this kind of gray box go away. So if I bring it all the way to the right, now we kind of have this side by side vision, which kind of can be useful if you want to like make the HTML small and focus on the CSS, or vice versa. So if you prefer that, you can do it this way. You can always click and drag it back here to remove it. But for now, I'll probably keep it side by side. Okay. And let's kind of minimize that because we're going to work in the CSS. What else could we do? Let's say we want to change something else about the paragraphs. One more thing we could change. So you notice here we'll do the thing we're changing, what we want to change it to, and then we do a semicolon. The line has to end with a semicolon. We can do multiple things. We'll click return here, and we'll do font dash size. This is going to determine how large something is. You see a bunch of defaults here. You could choose one like large. You can also specify pixel values. Let's just be kind of obnoxious here and do 30 pixels. Go ahead and save that. You don't need to resave this one. We haven't changed anything there. You won't see the dot. We've only changed the CSS. The link's already been made. Let's go back to our web page, give it a refresh. Okay, and now we can see that this has grown larger. Cool. So what else could we do? We've changed a few things about the paragraph. Why don't we choose something else? Let's say we wanted to change this header here, the H1. If we wanted to do that, all this applies only to the tag of P, the paragraph tag. If we want a different thing to change, we can click return here. And then we'll type the new tag. I want to change H1, okay? And let's do our curly brackets, click return. You could change the color of that. Let's say aqua. Let me show you one more property. We can also do the background color. Background color, again, I'm going kind of fast there, but it's background dash color, no space. If you do space, you will get an error. So again, background color. This is going to change the background cover, obviously. And we have aqua as the text color, so let's maybe pick something that kind of complements that. I'm just going to do black just because I know the aqua will show up well on it. Okay, so this right here says, take your header 1 tags, make their text aqua color and their background black. If I save this, I go back to my web page, refresh. Okay, and now we can see it's applied to here. It did not apply here. That was not a H1 tag. We can see down here, this is an H3 tag, so it's not going to apply to that. But it is applying to the first one. You'll also notice that if you make another header tag, so let's say down below here, I made another H1. I called it the third header because we have 3 of them. 1, 2, 3. Save the HTML and then refresh. This one will also have the same CSS properties. So you can see it's visible in every single instance of the H1 tag. Okay, so that will be a kind of good stopping point for the video. We've looked at a few CSS properties and how to link them together with an HTML document.